Welcome to Current Affairs. My name is Nathan Robinson. I am the editor-in-chief of Current Affairs magazine. I am joined today by Brian Merchant. He is the technology columnist for the Los Angeles Times. He is also the author of the books The One Device, The Secret History of the iPhone, and most recently, the book we are here to speak with him today about, the vividly titled Blood in the Machine, The Origins of the Rebellion Against Big Tech. Brian Merchant, thank you so much for joining us on Current Affairs today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for that introduction.
Blood in the Machine, that's great. I love that.
Yeah, I like it too.
That stays with you. Okay, well, your book is very much about the present and also about the past. Your book is a history of the Luddite movement, which people may think they know, but they don't necessarily know. But your book, as I said, is about the origins of the struggle against big tech. So it is in very many ways about issues that we face today. You say in the book, the history of the Luddites, the real ones, not the pejorative figment of the entrepreneurial imagination, gives us a framework to evaluate the utility of technologies and their social impacts. We're going to get to that framework, but first, let's have you take us back in time to the moment that the Luddite movement emerges, because it emerges at a very, very particular moment. And I'd like you to maybe tell us a little bit about that moment and what's going on.
So in 1811 is the year that the Luddites finally take up their hammers. But before we get there, we should briefly talk about the last 100 years or so, because this is sort of the early days of the Industrial Revolution, in which sort of historians like to talk about the machinery being developed that's the kindling for the Industrial Revolution. Things like the spinning jenny and the water frame, things that are going to automate or make much more efficient the production of yarn, and then machines like the wide frame or the gig mill or the shearing frame, implements that are essentially doing what today we call automation. That's called mechanization back in the day, but it is reducing the amount of labor needed to do a job. And the other important thing to know is that at this time, cloth workers are the largest sort of industrial base of workers. They're the sort of the largest class of workers in England, and apart from agrarian workers. And it's actually, it's not a perfect life. It can be a little bit, precarious here and there, but by and large, it's a pretty nice setup in a lot of ways. A lot of these folks are working from home or in small shops. You have a lot of control over your day. You're running a machine in your cottage. The term cottage industry comes from this. But as these new machines become available, and as the ideology of a certain Scottish economist take root, the Adam Smith's ideology starts to gain traction with a large number of the elites, who begin to focus on things like dividing labor. And combined with the machinery, you start to get factorization, and you start to get this will to sort of embark on mass production. So you have these trends kind of converging: more machinery, more interest in organizing labor in a way that begins to resemble the factory. And then as that machinery starts to be accumulated and organized by early entrepreneurs or industrialists, they start to take profit share and money away from the workers who have been doing this work in a specific way for literally hundreds of years in some contexts. So they are exacerbating inequality. The workers are aware this is happening. They see that the machinery is the implement that is sort of the vessel being used by the industrialists for this change, and they try to go to Parliament and the industrialists ask from some protections, some support, minimum wage, or tax the machines maybe, and they get rebuffed completely. And then by the end of the first decade of the 1800s, Parliament says, enough with it. We're siding with the entrepreneurial class. We're going to throw out all the regulations, all of the rules that used to govern this trade for so long that entrepreneurs have been sort of running roughshod over to, imagine Lyft or Uber back then. That's about what they were doing, just kind of pretending that they were, not participating in the trade in the same way, and therefore use technology as an excuse to go around the rules. Finally, the workers have had enough, right? 1811, it's also a hard time. We have trade sanctions. We have a bad crop failure. So we have an economic depression. automation, fear of factorization, workers seeing their identities going up in smoke, their working lives going up in smoke, and their backs against the wall. Basically, they resort to this tactic of last resort, and they become Luddites.
At the beginning of your book, the kind of cast of characters with the people, and then you have a separate cast of characters essentially with the machinery, and you have the pictures of all these extraordinary machines, and it makes you kind of try and think back into what it must have been like to lay eyes on these things for the first time. As you mention, things had changed, had happened very, very slowly. You're writing about England mostly, and in Britain, and as you said, they've been doing the same thing for hundreds of years. Not much had changed, and all of a sudden these devilish contraptions threaten to destroy so much, and nobody knows what's going to happen. What records do we have? What kind of interesting records do we have of these things being introduced, and what people's first kind of reactions to them were?
So, yeah, it's interesting. It's the common sort of, way that Luddites get painted is that they're anti-technology. They're not, of course. They knew the technology pretty well. They were technologists themselves, basically. They had command over the weaving machinery or the stocking making machinery of the day. So they knew pretty well when there's these innovators, as we might call them today, or entrepreneurs who are making tweaks to make them more efficient or trying to speed certain parts up. So I don't think that they would react viscerally to sort of the aesthetics of the machinery, but to the purpose that they knew to which it would be put. So there's a part early on when Edmund Cartwright, who's the inventor of the power loom, which it seeks to automate the process of weaving, which was a bit more complex than some of the other machines were doing. And he sent it out to some weavers and said, I want some notes on this. Can you show me what I'm doing wrong here? And they wouldn't touch it. They said, no, we know what this is. We know what you're trying to do here. You're trying to automate our work. We don't want any part of it. When James Hargreaves unveiled his spinning jenny, even before Luddites were around to popularize this tactic, people smashed his machines and kind of chased him out of town. So there was this sort of revulsion or this reaction to the idea that you would use machinery to automate somebody else's job and, quote, take their bread. That's what they would always say in the letters and their entreaties. They would say, we don't want you to take our bread. We are, honest working men. And to automate that work for the profit of another person was to them just as morally unjustifiable as stealing. It was thievery. So I would add also that they had a revulsion and they reacted quite strongly to the factory and the facts of for the first time when buildings started being erected that were 6 stories high in order to better sort of organize the division of labor. They knew also what that sort of entailed, and the first factories housed child laborers, and they were basically these workshops of horror where people were being ground up and losing limbs and being overworked. And so to face that future, they saw that as the most looming indignity of all, perhaps, and they really hated the idea of another quote, to stand at their command. They hated this idea that they would be somebody's boss. They'd have to answer to an overseer. There is some language on record to how they describe, the machines. They call them, the obnoxious machines, quote, and they have some language like that. But not a lot survives outside of the threatening letters that they would send to the entrepreneurs, because as we may talk about, it soon became a crime punishable by death to be a Luddite, to smash a machine. So they kept their paper trail pretty thin.
Yeah, I mean, the term, I quoted you at the beginning there, talking about the term as it is used today, with the connotation of being anti-technology. Obviously, if you think of an archetypal Luddite, it might be Ted Kaczynski in his cabin, wants to destroy industrial civilization. But you go back to this struggle, it's almost not even about the machines, or it is about the machines, but it is about the uses to which the machines are being put, and it's about the bread, really, far more than it's about the technology. And there are a number of points at which you have quotes that from historians and from primary sources that indicate that their objection was not. You have a quote in here if workmen disliked certain machines, it was because of the use to which they were being put, not because they were machines or because they were new.
That's exactly right. Again, they had another great phrase the Luddites had was they were against the machinery hurtful to commonality. They were not against the workings of the machine or against somebody building new machinery that could, do something more efficiently. But again, it's in the social context to which this is being deposited. These are, they're some of the first true sort of industrial capitalists who are using machinery for this express purpose, and that is to do their work more cheaply and for the sake of generating more profits. So they're seeking, both to, because it's also important to underline, just like today, they're not automating the work completely. They're not making it so a machine can just do this work and no human is involved in the process. They're using the machinery as an instrument to transfer the worker from one set of conditions to another, or to sort of break labor power, to as leverage over the worker, or to, employ, more vulnerable and workers they can pay less, like children. So it's economists today would call it de-skilling, which is basically what they were seeking to do. So it would be completely different in the context of, the community. Somebody said, oh, we've got this machinery. Why don't we all sort of get together and figure out how we can benefit from it together? This could make all of our lives better if we can, figure out a way to more equitably produce more cloth, and then maybe we can all share in the benefits. But that's not what was happening. Then, like now, there's only a small subset of people who had access to the kind of capital and investment and space and influence, political influence, you would need to sort of organize a big factory or something like that. And once that's up and running, everybody else has to compete with that on price and so on and so forth. Like you said, it's all about the context to which the machinery is being developed. And the Luddites were not anti-technology, they were anti-poverty.
Well, yes. And you have this one point in your book that I remember where you cite an example of a machine favored by workers and disfavored by employers, which was something like a machine that would have counted the threads in a piece of cloth to determine its quality so that the workers could prove that they were making things of excellent quality, and the employers didn't like. It was not a machine that served the interests of the employer because they didn't give a shit about quality.
Right. Yeah, surprise. They didn't want anything that was going to, force them to pay workers any more than they had to. Not interested in that machinery. No, it's only when they can be used as a way to reduce wages, to save labor costs.
I just want to drive this point home. Really is not a debate about technology. It is a debate, and Luddism isn't a position on an inherent position on the abstract notion of technology or machinery. It is a position on a certain kind of inhuman introduction of new uses of machinery and technology to do particular things in ways that are disruptive to society and hurt people.
That's right. Yeah, no, Luddism is about questioning who machinery serves. It's really a question of it's really a question of political economy. It's really a question of being able to locate exploitative or abusive uses of technology, and in which cases machinery becomes hurtful to commonality. So yeah, as sort of a framework, I think it's one that we can certainly apply today, which is, why I found it so interesting to.
Yes. Well, if we just pull back into the present for a moment, we can think about how criticisms of Uber are not criticisms of the concept of a rideshare app. They are criticisms of the way in which this particular rideshare app is introduced and how it exploits drivers. Or when I talk to, we have a lot of artists who contribute to Current Affairs, and they all, hate AI in uses in art. And sometimes their criticisms are aesthetic, this is soulless and horrible. But most of the criticisms are, as you say, political economy. They know that this technology is going to be used by, instead of a corporate client hiring an artist, they'll just, have the machine do the work. And they know that it's going to devalue art, and they know that what it consists of is looking at, hoovering up all of the art, looking at it, and having the machine make an inferior thing in order to save money. And their criticism is, again, not so much of the idea, the concept of having image generators, which could be kind of interesting on their own, but the social uses to which the technology is put.
Yep. And the way that it's developed. And I mean, a lot of the, the politics are sort of built into the technology, from the get-go, at least a technological product. And those are both great examples because we can quite easily imagine a ride-sharing app that is run by a collective of drivers, of workers who own the platform themselves. Maybe some of the earnings to hire a web developer to pay for the fees, the server fees. We could very easily imagine this, and we can imagine it because some of them exist, and some of them have had varying degrees of success. It's hard to compete with something that like Uber that has billions of dollars in venture capital money to go out and gain market share and do all that. But yeah, again, it's the way that the company is constituted, the way that it offers its service. There's nothing about the technology that says Uber has to take over 50% of the rake of every ride and send it upstream to the executive, to the C-suite. There's nothing that says that the information about the ride can't be transparent so the driver can make an informed decision about whether or not it should take a ride. You can very easily imagine a platform that has been developed in such a way that it is equitable and serves workers and doesn't gouge them and the consumers. Likewise, you could imagine a generative AI that, was done much more carefully, where people might be happy to submit some of their art if they were being, consented and compensated, or they knew the use to which it was being put, and there was a social contract that governed this stuff. And that's what it keeps coming down to, and always has. It's the Luddites' time. There's the people who are building these technologies and are seeking to profit from them are perfectly happy to tear up the social contract in each of these cases, whatever it is, to develop technology in a way that's not in any way democratic or giving workers input in over the process that's going to change or disrupt their lives. In the Luddites' time, they rolled into town with their automated machineries. A lot of time they weren't from the neighborhood. They weren't from this community. They didn't understand it. They just set up a factory near a river because they wanted to use the water power, or outside of town because there was a labor pool, and they just started building machinery. And they didn't ask, what the impact of all of this would be. They didn't consult the workers. They didn't say, would you like to, collaborate on this, and what can we do better? No, they just wanted very clearly to take the market share away from the workers and to do it in service of profiting the factory owner. And in the process, they ruined a lot of communities, and that's what the Luddites were fighting against. And that's why today we're again seeing so much upheaval and resistance to AI and to the gig work apps. That's why the writers were out on the picket lines, fighting AI. And it's good to see this resurgence of resistance. It is for very much the same reasons, because it keeps being used in the same way.
Yeah. And so, when we look back at the Luddites through the kind of sympathetic lens that you view them through in this book, we see, people who are really acting quite rationally in the kind of really dire circumstances that they find themselves in, because they find themselves in a moment where they can see that something is about to be shoved down their throats. It's going to be, as you said, imposed on their communities. And there's nothing they can do about it, right? There's no legislation coming. There's nobody coming to save them. In the free market system, these manufacturers are free to do this. The machines, they work. They do what they are intended to do, which is to, eliminate labor costs. And all these people see their whole lives, so probably many of whom are young, they're in their 20s, they see their whole lives stretching out in front of them, and they don't know what they're going to do because their skill has just been devalued to nothing, and nobody cares. And so then comes machine break. Let's smash the machine. So tell us a bit about what the Luddites kind of organize and do.
Yeah, we kind of worked right up to it before. But yeah, so this tactic of last resort, Luddism, it's quite literally named after this mythical figure, Ned Ludd, who they made a legend about it. It's probably apocryphal, but Ned Ludd was supposed to be this apprentice worker, this apprentice weaver who was told he wasn't being productive enough, and his master had him whipped, which quite reasonably so, I think, made him angry, and he smashed the machine that he was working on with a hammer and fled into Sherwood Forest. And there's a lot of parallels there. He's the same forest as Robin Hood. Ned Ludd, Robin Hood, they sound similar. It's kind of the same vibe. This was from the same kind of culture and of discontent and dissidence. So the Luddites organized this campaign where they have this tactic where they identify the factory owners who are, sort of unleashing the most exploitation, and they do, they figure it out. They calculate, how many machines each factory owner has, how many jobs they've automated, how many people they've stolen bread from, so to speak, and they'll write this letter. They'll say, look, we know you have 200 of the obnoxious machines. If you don't take them down by next Sunday, you'll get a visit from Ned Ludd's army. And it would be signed, General Ludd or Ned Ludd or King Ludd sometimes, and they would give the week. So, and if the factory owner wanted to sort of comply, which they often did, a lot of times they would say, okay, we don't want the trouble. We'll just take them down. We'll be done with it. We'll restore prices to the wages that we were paying before we started using this machinery. A lot of them waved the white flag. But if not, then the Luddites would either sneak in through a window under the cover of night, or they'd hold up the overseer at gunpoint, and they'd go into the factory and they would take Enoch's hammer, they called it, named after the blacksmith who made it, and they would just smash all of the automating machinery. They'd leave all the other machines not disruptive to the neighborhood, to the community, to the way of life as it had been governed for many years. And they would leave with a warning. They say, if you bring them back, if the old obnoxious machines, then we'll come back and we'll do the whole place. But by and large, they would slip out and sort of leave that at that. And this tactics proved so successful that it was soon sort of spreading across England, even to sort of beyond where where they clearly didn't have a central network that was communicating to other places. It was it had like a meme-like quality where people were taking the tactic, taking the name Ned Ludd, and putting it into action in different places. And as a result, it really did sort of inspire this huge folk movement, and they were hailed as heroes by the working class. They were, cheered in the streets as they got bolder, and they would smash machines by day. People would be out there, egging them on. Sometimes officials who were supposed to intervene would just kind of let them do it because they saw it as morally justified too. And so for a long time, many months, it was a pretty exciting and invigorating movement that was, seen as this long overdue movement to sort of reclaim a lot of what had been taken from the working people. And it had a lot of solidarity, people whose jobs were not threatened by machinery, or sometimes were in fact stronger because of industrialization, colliers, coal workers, steel workers, hatters, shoemakers. They would join them because they understood this as a strike against exploitation, against inequality, against injustice. And that perplexed the authorities at the time. Like, why are the hat makers out there with them? We don't understand. They didn't understand that this was a real grassroots sort of working class movement. In fact, it was a formative one. At the time, you could not organize. It was combining, quote unquote, was against the law, banned by the Combination Acts. And there was no democracy, of course. So that's also one of the reasons that, their backs were to the wall. You couldn't petition your local representative for change and vote him out if you didn't listen. But yeah, it was this thunderous popular thing. And the states, could have responded by saying, okay, we see how, angry and upset and desperate a lot of these people are. A lot of these people are actually, on the brink of starvation. It is desperate times. There's been a crop failure, and those trade sanctions I talked about has led to a lot of people in really dire straits. And the state is just ignoring them in favor of letting entrepreneurs and industrialists do as they please. So instead of trying to ameliorate the situation, of course, they start to mount a campaign to put it down by force. So this results in the largest domestic occupation in England's history, with tens of thousands of soldiers fighting the Luddites. That law that mentioned earlier, they make it a crime to break a machine, punishable by death. It's a campaign of force.
It's a very harsh backlash to impose these things. And kind of extraordinary thing is, your book, when you start to look at the timeline here, because you have each chapter is dated, it's a very short period of time. Actually, it's a couple of years, really, that this movement takes off and then is suppressed and destroyed.
That's really important to note, too, is that I think a lot of people especially if you're, arguing that, the Luddites were backwards and dummies, as, a lot of people are still want to do, then one of the sort of the arrows in your quiver is that, well, the technology won out after all. Like, we all ended up no, this was not a matter of like any natural transition or natural progression where people just sort of stumbled upon, the wonderful benefits of technology. No, this was a decision made by force, by a state that was willing to unleash brutality on working people in order to side with sort of the engines of industry. And they sent the troops, they changed the penal code to be extremely severe. They empowered the factory owners to hire militiamen and to sort of defend their factories with force and to gun down the Luddites as they attacked them. So it was actually quite a concerted effort that took a lot of blood and treasure in order to enforce. And it's not, just that the market decided technology was better. It's the state decided that it would be used in this way, and that sort of the capitalist formation would be favored and would be in fact promoted by the state.
This is in just after the first decade of the 19th century, 1811, 1812, 1813. And then, we know how the story goes after that, because you could read it in Engels' reports on the working class in Manchester, and Karl Marx in Capital, just, Marx and Engels being so horrified by by the factory system in England, which becomes far more brutal. It becomes just totally vicious by the mid to late 19th century.
Yeah, the Luddites were right. And I say this all the time. The Luddites were right. They feared this scale of oppression, and that's what they were fighting against, because they saw it coming, and it did. And it unfolded exactly as they feared, where people were, forced to work in these horrendous conditions in these factories, worse than anything we can imagine now. Although we're starting to devolve back towards that state in a lot of ways, because I used to, when I was researching this, it was like, oh, well, at least we, we're not using child labor. And then it's like, well, actually, Sarah Huckabee would like a word, but it is very real. And that's, what I always come back to is like, it did not have to be that way. The Luddites, again, were not anti-technology. They were anti-getting trampled on and anti, having no say in the way that this industrial development would take place. And when they lost that battle, this was the cost. It was decades and decades of mass immiseration.
You're listening to the Current Affairs podcast from Current Affairs magazine in New Orleans, Louisiana. Current Affairs is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we depend entirely on reader subscriptions and donations. You'll notice we have no ads, no mattresses, no recruiters, no sports betting. If you can help us in our mission to build independent progressive media, please visit currentaffairs.org/donate to make a donation, or currentaffairs.org/subscribe to subscribe to our beautiful print magazine. Thank you so much for supporting our work. Now, back to the program. I want to get to the lessons for our own time, which are presumably a very important part of why you decided to so much work in putting together the history of the Luddites, because you think it's relevant, it's powerfully relevant for our moment. You conclude by one of those lessons is, the way we should think about technology. And you talk about this idea that, quote, robots are coming for our jobs. And you actually say that robots are not threatening your job. We shouldn't think this way. This is not how we should think, is that there's this kind of technology and it is this organism, it's this thing that's on the move and making its inevitable movements towards us. That's not the way to think. And by looking back at the Luddites, we can see why that's not, in fact, the way to think about technology.
Yeah, I mean, just about every point I think that we've made thus far supports that thesis that, there's no such thing as technological determinism. I mean, we, especially, Silicon Valley is so swept up in this sort of formulation as all technology as progress. But no, technology is a series of choices, and it's made by people who develop it. And those technologies and people have politics. And if we so choose, the ability to shape or to decide, what goes into that process. I'm not saying it's always easy, because sometimes there are immense barriers put up between us and these technologies being developed. And that's, also a calculation that has long been made where, Google and Apple and Amazon would rather that they have the say in how, the technology is created and how it's used. But it is not true. It is not true that it is immutable, that all technology is progress, and that we cannot ask for more say over these systems. And we're beginning to see more and more of that. And it's been really, sort of encouraging to see sort of this breakdown in the equation of all, technology to progress. But yeah, I think the quote I put in the book is, it's like a robot is not coming for your job. Management is, right? Like they're making this decision to try to replace you. It's not any force of nature. They think they can make a little bit of money by replacing some of your tasks with a, robotic software automation or, a piece of mechanized equipment on the factory line. It's a decision, and we can contest those decisions, and more people are.
You pointed out recently online that, in fact, the latest shakeup at OpenAI indicates, quote you, that it makes clear that big tech will in a heartbeat crush any concrete measure intended to enhance AI safety if it poses a threat to its ability to profit. There appears to be, from what we understand, a kind of clash at that company that has developed this ChatGPT, a dispute between those who were saying kind of slow down this technology. We need to think carefully about the social implications, whether or not you accept the existential risk fears of AI. There are those who say, okay, well, we can't put profit first, versus those who say, no, this is a product. Look at this amazing product. We can make so much money with this product. We don't need to think about any of the broader social implications. And as these things are developed, unfortunately, when they're developed by profit-seeking corporations, there's a very, very strong incentive to not give a shit whether they hurt a lot of people.
Yeah, no, that's right. This is such an interesting case to me because like all of the real world sort of, social issues are the ones that we've been talking about. Like people are going to try to use AI to, put other people out of work. It's going to cause some disruption and perhaps suffering. And we know that AI systems are biased and they can be used by police or offices or authorities to ID perpetrators, and they're often wrong. So it leads to all of these problems. Like there's a lot of very real issues with the use of AI. But what Silicon Valley has kind of allowed to be sort of the permissible and respectable debate about the merits of AI is this question of, will it become sentient like Skynet and eventually destroy all of humanity? So you're allowed to have that as a genuine concern. But what's interesting about what happened with OpenAI over last week is that I think where the money is, like, they don't really care, and they never really cared. They let, the sort of the rank and file software developers and, the sort of the people working at the tech companies think this was, talk about this as a problem because it kind of benefits them, right? If you're talking about AI as being so powerful, it can wipe out humanity, then it's certainly powerful enough to like write your marketing software. You do your, email marketing management or whatever. They're selling it actually in the trenches too. It's a useful marketing strategy to have this going on. But now when it turns out, well, wait a second, actually, there were people on the board of OpenAI who were taking all this very seriously, so seriously that they thought Sam Altman, who's kind of the de facto guru for, the modern coming of AI, says, I think I want to go now start making deals with sovereign funds in the Middle East and SoftBank and start, really like, it seems like he's just kind of going all in on the expansion of AI services with his company. We still don't know all the details, but it sure seems like the board thought that all that was too much, and they really thought that their duty was to protect humanity. So they put them out. And within 48 hours, they're saying, I'm sorry, it's this big thing. Altman's been absorbed by Microsoft. It's just like the tiniest bump. Silicon Valley will not tolerate even this sort of science fictional debate over whether it's an existential risk at all. It just gets sucked up into the maw of the sort of engine of profit that big tech is just going to, it won't tolerate any debate that's going to, be any sort of a threat to the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. I detect from what you say there that you're somewhat skeptical of the existential threat narrative about AI. I think the other problems are a lot more pressing.
Like I said, I think it's a useful fiction to sort of move the goalposts. If they can get everybody worried that one day AI is going to, like, rise out of some robotics factory in the form of a robot that's going to murder everybody, or, drop nukes on human civilization, then that's such a more visceral and much more sort of compelling or exciting threat to try to deal with than, like, well, what's actually going to be the impact to the economy and to working people, or how is this going to exacerbate biases, and what are sort of keeps the focus off of the real world stuff that we should be thinking about. Like, should we be allowing facial recognition at all, or is this just a toxic technology? Are we, allowing too much surveillance into our lives and, feeding it into these automated systems to make judgments about how productive we are? It's sort of ignoring all that in favor of the big science fiction argument that has captivated most policymakers and the movers and shakers. So yeah, no, I do not think that this is a threat that we need to be worrying about, that, that it's going to become sentient. I think it's, like I said, it's a useful marketing tool, and it's a useful tactic for sort of, keeping the conversation away from the ones that we should be having about, day-to-day policy issues.
Just to close here, you profile many of those. You take us up to the present day and you profile many of those. Your view of the kind of contemporary heirs of the spirit of the Luddites, and you encourage us to look back at the Luddites and see what they were really all about, what they really tried to do, the ways in which they failed, and the ways in which they bequeathed us a legacy of noble struggle. You conclude, it may be only a matter of time before the rebel workers of this new machine age see the injustices of the algorithmic platforms as too much to bear, the surveillance apparatus of big tech too intrusive, the robotic pace of work too ruthlessly body-breaking. So tell us, Ryan Muchin, what do the heirs of Ned Ludd and the Luddites look like today? What does it mean to be a Luddite here in 2023?
Yeah. If I had written this book, if I had taken one more year to write the book, then I would have even more salient examples to roll into that, more than I already had, which was a lot. But, I think maybe a really good and pure sort of example that correlates quite nicely is the WGA strike, right? Because we have a group of, what we would call skilled workers who were quite familiar with the new sort of software that the studio wanted to use, not to replace their job outright, but to maybe generate a script that then they would ask the writers to, rewrite for a reduced fee and not get the residuals, or not get, the full range of benefits. And it's a way to, break worker pay, break worker power. And sort of the WGA recognized this, and they drew a red line. They did perhaps what you could call modern Luddism, and they rejected this idea at all, that the studios could use AI to create a script at all. That was off the table as far as they were concerned. And they fought it tooth and nail, and they won. And I think I argued one of the reasons that they were so popular historically, Hollywood writers aren't the most sort of relatable labor group in the US, but this time support for their strike was off the charts, and AI was front and center. I think a lot of people have anxieties about automation and AI, and seeing them kind of fighting it and saying no was a spark. And it led the SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild, to sort of take a similar stance. And it's sort of snowballing, I think. And so the modern Luddites are recognizing when a management or a boss or an executive is going to use technology explicitly in this way to degrade their working conditions, to take away pay, to build power against them, and they're finding ways to fight back. Fortunately, we don't have to use hammers yet, because we have the ability to organize and the ability to we can get creative. I would also call the Safe Street Rebel folks who are coning cars in San Francisco, self-driving cars that were out and about in the neighborhoods, that sort of that got, vote to expand after some kind of shady maneuverings from the companies. Well, they put traffic cone on the hood of the car and it shuts them down.
That's charming.
It is charming, and it works. And they would be out there they call it coning, and they'd be out there, just dropping the cone off, taking a video of it. It just stops. It confuses the car. Somebody has to come out there and waste time and capital to correct it. And, it makes for this sort of kind of striking scene that went really viral. The movement got covered, and it gave the activists an opportunity to talk about why they were resisting self-driving cars. So I think the modern Luddite isn't against technology, carte blanche. They're against these uses when technology is being imposed on us anti-democratically, exploitatively, and asking who it serves. Who is this for? Is this hurtful to commonality? And then being willing to fight back, with whatever tools are at their disposal. Sometimes maybe that's a hammer. Most of the time, not quite yet.
Well, couldn't be a more relevant time to revisit the original story of the Luddites, told so well in this book, which the New Yorker calls a gripping narrative of political resistance, and you profile an extraordinary cast of characters from the past, including Prince George the Prince Regent, including Mary Shelley, including Lord Byron. They all pop up in here. So, to find out more about what the original Luddites were really like and why their story is relevant today, our listeners and readers should pick up Blood in the Machine, The Origins of the Rebellion Against Big Tech, available from Little Brown. Brian Merchant, thank you so much for joining us on Current Affairs today.
Thanks for having me, Nathan. It was great.
The Current Affairs Podcast is a product of Current Affairs Magazine. If you are not subscribed to Current Affairs Magazine, visit currentaffairs.org/subscribe today and get our glorious print edition. The Current Affairs Podcast is released regularly every week on patreon.com/currentaffairs. Thanks for listening.